Last but not least is Naren Shaam, who is the founder and CEO of Goeuro, a very exciting company from Europe, which has organized this train travel in a very exciting way, with Chris O'Brien, who is the European correspondent of VentureBeat. Naren and Chris, please join me on stage. Chris.
Thanks, Loic.
Welcome.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you for being here. You're here from Berlin.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed getting to chat with Naren the last couple of days and hearing more about his story, and it's a fascinating story. It's not the typical European startup story. So if we can actually just talk a little bit about your personal story, where you're from originally,
Yeah.
and how you got to Berlin.
Sure. So I originally come from Bangalore, India. I went to school in the US. I've been there, I lived there 12 years of my life. I studied engineering, worked as a product manager, then went to business school, and then worked in finance. And 2 years ago, I moved to Berlin to build Goeuro. And yeah, the idea was very simple for me. I traveled Europe for about 4 months, and I saw how difficult it is to understand the ground transportation system here, which is actually superb. Rail and bus connects every little part of Europe. But the access to information is very nationalistic. You're in France, you have a rail and a few bus companies. You go to Germany, you have a different rail company and a few bus companies. And constantly you're, I guess, on Google, or you're comparing all the time whether it's cheaper or faster to get from Paris to Amsterdam by train or by flight, how much longer it takes, including getting from the city center, etc. And said, since I guess no one's done it, I decided to move here a couple of years ago and build it myself.
Okay, so let me back up a little bit. So you're living in New York at this point, working in the financial sector, and you have this idea, and you try to start doing initially from New York, but in Europe, and you decide, okay, this isn't working, I need to actually go to Europe. So how did you get from there to Berlin?
So again, the people we work with is large government organizations. We work with state-owned rail companies that have 300, 400,000 people. So where to start is always a big question for us. So I tried this from New York, and I never got any response. We're called Goeuro. I said, okay, we have to be in Europe somewhere. I had been in Berlin before, and I'd absolutely completely fallen in love with the city. It's young, energetic, artistic. But then when I started to do more research on what's a good ecosystem, Berlin had a strong tech ecosystem, because fundamentally what we do is we build technology for rail and bus companies to bring their data online, so users can just search, like I said, Paris, Amsterdam, and compare. So Berlin was attractive for me in terms of a few reasons. A few reasons mainly because of the low cost of tech talent there compared to London. It's super expensive. But also the ecosystem was starting to build up. I was one of the first people in the ecosystem, so this was good. At least the first wave. There were a lot of good companies before, like SoundCloud. But I guess the challenge was I didn't know a single human being in Berlin, and I didn't speak a word of German. I just said, okay, this is a gamble I'm going to make, and 3 weeks later I was in Berlin.
And so you're Indian, coming from America. You show up in Berlin, speaking no German. And what was the reaction that you got when you get off the train? Yeah,
the first month of any startup is always the hardest. It is even harder. It is amplified when you're a foreigner, when you don't speak the language, you don't understand the local legal system, regulation, how to set up a company, all the way to hiring a tech talent. Like, you need to hire a good technical lead, and they have to believe that this random Indian dude moving from the US is going to get the rail contracts and raise enough capital to build a full company. So the first days are always difficult, and yes, I started working in a co-working space just by myself until I got enough rail contracts. This is roughly 2 years ago. Today we're in 7 countries. We have 80 people from 30 countries, all based in Berlin. It's a slightly larger startup, I would say.
But I imagine the first German word you probably learned was crazy, right? I mean, people were like,
yeah.
What are you doing here? What makes you think you can do this here?
Yeah.
How did you sort of push through that personally? I mean, how do you sort of, did you just have the confidence the whole time that you were making the right choice and that you could sort of overcome the cultural issues?
Well, to be honest, the cultural issues were blind for me. I didn't see it as obvious as I see now, basically, maybe looking back. For me, the opportunity was too huge, and having worked in New York, especially in financial services, it was a decision I had made very rationally and said, the opportunity cost for me to leave a good job in New York is too high for me to not, I have to be fully certain that the market's big, it's 200 billion euro market, just rail and bus. And I said, if I crack it, this is really a big opportunity. So I was so focused on just building what I'm after that I guess I didn't see the cultural gaps as much.
No room for self-doubt. You just
no, especially when you're an entrepreneur.
Straight ahead.
Yeah.
And how's your German now? Better?
Ich spreche gut Deutsch, yeah.
So you went from just coming off cold off the train or the plane in Berlin. You're working at a co-working space for a while.
Yeah.
And at some point now you're starting to call these big conservative state-run transportation companies saying, hi, you don't know me, but I'm fresh off the boat and I am here to tell you that there's a better way.
Yeah.
How did you sort of begin to work into that sector to convince these people that there was a better way and a great partnership for them?
Yeah. So in general, I guess there's no secret sauce. Getting in the door is always hard, and the larger the company is, it gets harder and harder. Slowly, I started to build a network around travel that allowed me to get the meetings. And over time, I realized what is it they're looking for, and which is distribution, for example. And then I guess the first one, good salesmanship, lucky. We convinced a few. And now we have 150 partners, so it's a snowball effect now.
Yeah. And how many countries are you in?
We're in 7 countries now, and we have 150 partners. We're only 1 year, 6 months, end of this month, so very young company.
Yeah. So then along the way, of course, initially you're bootstrapping a little bit, but you go out to raise money.
Yeah.
You've raised 2 official rounds now. So tell me about then raising the first round. I assume you had some partners and some sort of version of the product up and running at that point.
Yeah.
But you're an entrepreneur with no track record at that point in terms of raising money.
Yeah.
So did you go initially to European firms or German firms? Did you go back to the US looking for money?
So I started, well, the fundraising for me was slightly different in that the product we build is slightly larger than a 2-people shop. We have to work with back-end systems of large state-run companies to replicate basically all their data. If there's 10,000 trains running in Germany, we need all 10,000 trains on our database. It's a large infrastructure project. So the amount of capital I needed to raise very clearly was much larger than any startup, at least in the beginning. So I started, so for me it was an opportunity that once you get the contracts, then you have the ability to get in the door. So once I was in the door, I managed to raise 4.5 million seed. It was a large seed for Berlin at that time, to build the first technology. And I pitched both American VCs, German VCs, and lucky enough, I got a combination of both, enough that all the Americans understood the opportunity we were after, this legacy industry that we want to bring to a 21st century distribution system. And at the same time, I needed a local European VC to build the team, hire the people. And the biggest challenge in building any company is building up a smart team. So I really needed a European VC for that.
And then by the time you guys went out earlier this year, just a few months ago, and raised a second round, how much was that?
It was 27 million A.
27 million that was your first official A round.
First official A round, yeah.
And at that point, it's been up and going for not quite 2 years.
It's 2 years as a company, but 1.5 years as a launch, yeah.
So at that point, what kind of situation were you in terms of approaching people? Were the doors open to you? Had you sort of established the credibility, or was it still a battle to get in front of people?
Well, it's always difficult to raise money as a founder. It's just fundamentally never easy. You always get many no's compared to the yeses. But this time was slightly different in that a lot of people knew who we were. A lot of people knew the extent of contracts. Like I said, we work with 150 companies today. The extent of data we collect. So it was, and most people got what we do, which is a very large ecosystem of travel in Europe, very nationalistic in the way it is situated today. And it's something that people saw fairly easily. So this time was, I want to say, slightly easier, but we also had very good metrics. Unfortunately, I can't share any of the internal metrics, but huge metrics. We were in 7 countries in less than a year and a half. And on average, a contract takes 9 months, and to build technology for a country takes 5 months. So it's not an easy challenge to go through 7 countries so quickly.
Yeah. So now going forward with that model, what is the kind of barrier to how quickly you can expand it? Is it just the speed at which you can get the state-run transportation entity to come around? And does that get easier now that you have, say 7 countries you can point to and say, look, we have this track record?
Yes. No, absolutely. It does get easier. The first one's always the hardest. But it doesn't mean Europe is very different than the US, where every country is its own individual. Europe is not one country. So the next country you go to is still the challenges of who do you speak to. It's easier to convince them now because we not just have a product they can play with, but actually underlying data that we can show the volume of transactions that actually go through the platform and how much we sell, and where the customers come from, and the reach we have today, which is huge. So this part gets easier, but still the challenges of dealing with contracts in different languages, legal systems, licenses, VAT, everything that we have to do to provide a product for that specific country still exists country by country. So we have basically a large legal team in every country just dealing with contracts all the time.
So now let me ask then about your growth as the founder of this. I mean, also new for you was, I imagine, managing the number of people that you have, let alone managing an organization that's distributed across, several different territories, different languages. How difficult was that, or did it all seem to just flow together in some way?
No, it's never so easy. Probably the biggest learning for me personally was just the how I had to scale very quickly to manage such a large organization.
Were you managing people in any of your previous positions?
Yes, I did. I managed about 12 people, and today we have 80. So it's a slightly different scale. But I all the time, I always hire good people, and the good people know how to manage other good people. There's no way around it. Otherwise, it's just going to collapse sometime. Yeah.
And I would imagine you have to give them some autonomy in these different areas, given that they're different cultures, different systems, technical and cultural, in terms of how they interact with the state industry in France versus Germany versus...
So in general, I have to say I'm quite involved in the product and the tech part. I've got a very good COO who runs the marketing and the rest of the organization today. We are from 30 countries, so a Spaniard knows how to program Renfe, the Spanish rail company, way better than anybody else in the rest of the organization. So we really work closely. It's not like they have full autonomy to build whatever they want, nor do I say this is exactly how it goes, because the challenges are unique with every country, and it's a collaborative effort. It's not like, hey, you do whatever you want. It's nor is it the other way around as well. Yeah.
And you mentioned, I thought this was interesting, now you're also learning Spanish because you're also involved in the negotiations. I mean, how many languages have you learned or tried to learn in the last 2 years?
I can speak conversational enough to order coffee and find out where the restroom is, probably, just in most European languages. But I speak some Spanish, I speak decent German enough to get by, and English. But we also have legal teams in every country that actually does the negotiation with me.
You're not having to read the contract in Spanish.
No, we get translated. But the contract is like 70 pages long, so it's not.
Yes.
I'm not fluent in contractual Spanish. Let's say.
And Google Translate doesn't quite work for those kind of.
Not for legal translations, no.
So with the latest round that you got, looking out over the next year.
Yeah.
Where do you expect to be, and how far do you expect that to carry you in terms of expanding to new countries?
So coverage is a key goal for us as a company. We want to be a pan-European platform. We are in 7. We hope to be, basically this cash carries us through, I guess, most of Western Europe. Exact country count, 18, maybe 22, it depends how many come through, how fast we can build technology. Because until we go into a specific country, we don't really know what the status quo is. Do they even have an API or not? Do they have their databases clean? Do they know where the train stations are? Because it's a challenge for us. So until we actually go in and start digging in, normally it takes 3 to 5 months historically, but yeah, it can be anything.
Yeah. And what about other continents then? I mean, I would imagine. The problem you're describing in Europe would be one similar in some ways to Africa, to Southeast Asia, to other places where there's many nationalities in a relatively compressed geographic region.
Yeah, Europe has a unique advantage in that the rail and bus infrastructure is superb across most of Europe. It's been there for a very long time, and the consumer ease of jumping from a train. It's in the city center. It's convenient. You don't have to go outside to the airport. And the closed geographies, everything is 4 or 6 hours by travel time, makes it very attractive model in Europe. That's why it's called Goeuro. That said, it still works very well in Southeast Asia. Like you said, there's a huge bus market in South America that we can probably expand to. Probably.
Yeah. But that's
further out. Europe is so big, and we're going after a 200 billion euro market, pan-European. It's a big market for us to make a big company out of it.
Well, and I've heard other people talk about that here today, just that notion that if you can get your arms around all of Europe, it's a much more massive market than people maybe give it credit for if you're coming from the United States or someplace else.
Yeah. It is. I mean, just in the 7 countries, we cover somewhere around 280 million people today, and this is just already a massive market.
Right.
The frequency of travel is much higher on ground transportation than flights, so the volume of traffic going through the platform is higher. The market is very dispersed, where, like I said, every country has its own infrastructure systems and technology. Even within a country, it's split between rail, bus, and flights. Competition is high among the modes of travel. So in general, we solve a very, I guess, unique consumer problem that has a very big market inherently. So we don't have to do much to grow. And the market is so big, it can accommodate so many players in the market.
Is there anything now that you've sort of picked up on this this voyage of sorts that you would pass on to other people, because just trying to think beyond their own local market, their own country, whether it's Germany or France or Slovenia?
Yeah. So in general, the thing I learned here when I moved from the US is kind of the US has the benefit of you launch a product, and if it works, it scales to 300-something million people. Europe doesn't have that advantage. Every country is you start from square one. Maybe you know a little bit, but you start from square one. So if you start thinking in kind of Germany is a separate market, I'm going to build it out fully until everything works, and then go to the next country, it'll take ages. You'll probably have to retire by the time you build a full pan-European. So we started to move countries very quickly, just because it allows us, there's a lot of network effects that come into play when you start doing pan-European. And this is something that I would probably encourage every entrepreneur to do, is just, one, Europe is a difficult market, right? It's not like the US, one large market. But once you make it through so many countries, the same barrier that you overcame to build this exists for the next player as well. They need to go through country by country. So you have a leg up over most people, and the faster you move, the faster that the separation is for you.
And have you seen other people trying to come up now behind you to say like, oh, this guy's doing this.
Yeah.
If I put a little twist on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big market, right? There's always going to be players. So we have regional, I want to say, competitors in each country that do countrywide, but Europe-wide, yeah, nobody in so many countries with so many partnerships today.
Yeah. I mean, it's a classic kind of thing that you might expect Rocket to sort of take notice of you in their backyard and say, oh.
It's a technology play with very difficult contracts. It's not an e-commerce play. It's a really heavy technology.
Yeah.
It's a different business model than what they've, I guess, historically focused on.
Well, fantastic. Congratulations. I think we're out of time here, but I want to thank you for making the trip down here, and thank you all for hanging in there with us this afternoon.
Thanks.